All right, what we're going to talk about today is a packing method commonly called cavity packing. In a general sense, it's going to be a box with layers of foam in it. Almost never do you not see it encased in a box. That does a couple things. It keeps the layers lined up automatically, registered what you want to do. In many instances, they have 1 inch of foam on the top, and that's going to be attached to the lid in nicer systems in different ways. Then underneath that, you'll have layers of 2 inch foam. And if it doesn't match exactly, you can do a fill box in the bottom, or fill layer of cardboard with foam to match it precisely. And then you're basically laying out your objects on the surface of this, and it has some nice features. It's basically, if it's done to its highest degree, everything is sort of at a glance. You can sort of see everything you need to see. Especially this is used a lot for traveling exhibition type, packing. Because when you have them, all the compartments compartmentalized, you get an instant view of if anything's missing. You can put associated items right next to each other, so you can see you have the lid with whatever, or the mounts or whatever you're doing. So that implies on the higher end of this that you are not doing multiple layers. There are some instances in some kinds of packing where it's really budget, where they'll go to the bottom of the box, put in just enough foam that's deeper than the biggest object, cut a compartment and do all of your compartments, and then go up. Generally, that's just begging for trouble. I don't think that we really want to do that. When it does come time to do your marking and cutting, there are several ways to do it, depending on how you're trained. Some people actually physically want to mark it. That's just like a habit. If you're going to do that, it's kind of good to have some high density, just as insurance. But so you can kind of hold it. Now this is all kind of to scale. Normally you'd use bigger boxes, but you'd use this to just kind of protect it as you go around the shape. Let's say if I do this one over here. Lots of things though. And especially that's important if you're trying to get a very accurate fit, if that's what you require. In many cases though, that is the pitfall of this kind of system. The tendency is to make things too exact and to fit too tightly, and more often than not, that's going to cause problems. The other option you have is to use either a pencil, or even better, a dowel rod the size of a pencil that's sharpened, and you can actually, let's do this. You can actually just drag it across the surface, and it'll leave like a little dotted line, virtually, around the figure. And basically, there's a number of different knives you can use. You can actually use a square-ended knife. That's what I was brought up doing. It'll still make turns, and it's good. A pointy knife, especially more narrow, will make turns better. Generally, the thickest foam you would have would be 4 inches, but typically what you find is 2 inches. And so you're just going to make your cuts, and trying to think of yourself as a jigsaw, keeping the blade pretty vertical, because we're going for, the first cut is just a simple cut, and it's just to remove the basic profile. And we're simplifying this profile for several reasons. If you get an angle, it gets a lot more complicated, especially if it's more than 1 layer deep. If it's more than 1 layer deep, you're going to do one of 2 things. And I'd be wearing gloves, by the way. If it's more than 1 layer deep, either you're going to use the same knife and go along the line that you cut and go deeper, Or there are people that are pretty good at this, that'll just use a big fillet knife. And there again, you've got to keep track of your angle, because if it's off perpendicular, it really starts to wander when you're cutting through multiple layers. But basically, what we want to do is we put that in the compartment. Typically what you want, though, is you don't want it to be able to hop around in there. You want it to basically be flush with the top. So when this flips down, it's right where the surface of the object is. So one way to do that is to have the object in there. One thing you can always do while handling objects is use high density, because that's one of the things we love about it, is it conforms really nicely, offers protection to the surface, but it's thin enough it doesn't really interfere with what we're doing. So in that case, I can come in, and it's always hard to stand in front of the camera, so I'm not going to even try. And basically, you can do one of two things. You can mark it, or you can cut it in place. But that's going to create a little piece that fills the void, obviously, left by the piece. So if I cut that separately, we can reinsert it and leave the piece fairly flush. When that goes down, the surface is nice and even. That'll come down, that'll hold it in place. Now for protection, there's a number of choices. The one thing that undermines the whole process to a degree, but is just really fast and can definitely work. I mean, there are different applications for this. But you can always use tissue that you just push down in there. The nice thing about that is any of this extra loose space around here, you just push the tissue down into. So that's like the most down and dirty. Boom, that one is done. What's commonly done, though, is to do a tuck pattern, which can be done a number of different ways. It has several advantages. What we do is we get our Tyvek, and when we're doing this, one of the things you have to do basically is you want to leave about 2 inches in between objects for this very reason. And you want to be able to have a line that comes out from that, a bit, so you can then tuck your material into that. And you want it to be generally at least 5/8 of an inch deep, maybe 3/4 of an inch, and out from it maybe 3/4 to an inch, inch being the most since you have 2 objects in there. And obviously if you have a circle cutter, this would be a little more beautiful. But that basically gives you something to tuck it into. And then you're taking this in, you're putting the dimpled side away from the object. If you can see the little dots, that goes away from the object. Then you basically place it in here. This is where good scissors help for trimming, because that's the only hard part about this. Before you go to trim it, you want to tuck this in. You can do some with your fingers. If you have a blade like this is my favorite knife of all time, basically. It's a nice thin leather knife. And I've taken the back edge and actually rubbed it on a sidewalk initially to keep it from snagging. The other thing, you want to tuck it in just enough to where it's going to hold its place. And this is for the most simple cavity. If you wanted this to fit a little better, there are voids in here. You could always pull that out and stuff material in there. And about right now, basically you just sort of hold the scissors and you just sort of pull back on the against the blade and work your way around. and just leave a little bit up, because that'll tuck in with no problem. And if I were doing this for a living every day, I'd probably be considerably faster. This is good because it gives you time to be critical. So one of the things you want to do is when you tuck, if you're not careful, you'll start pulling it up. And if you do that, you can look over here and find, let me see if it'll do it, that the object has raised up out of its whatever, because you've taken up any slack that you actually needed to have in there. One thing that is the key is to test it. Take the object in and out. Make sure it fits before you do any gluing. And in fact, usually you don't need to glue. So in this case, if you are going to glue it, you just stick it down in here. You can shoot a bead of glue and it's invisible. It's still going to do the same thing, but you don't see it. Another thing that is key to this typically is that many objects, you want to define where they pick it up. So part of the process is cutting out notches for where you want them to pick it up. In this case, this is kind of facilitates just the way I did it. So what we're talking about for this demonstration is just the use of cavity packs. That's what we commonly, talk about when you have objects that are placed in cavities cut out of the foam, shaped either, accurately or loosely to match them and separate them from other objects. In its most simple version, it can be just a rough outline of an object. Like in this case, we've got some highly collectible Iron Man glasses, and in this case, it's just wrapped in tissue and basically stuffed in the hole. The hole can be cut oversized, and it's actually easier that way than to spend a whole lot of time fine-tuning, and then you can place the object in and put fill tissue around it. So that's like kind of the down and dirty. For something like this, you could just close it right up. That is fine to have a non-covered. The problem with this was fast. People like this. There's some places that they do this kind of exclusively. But the more refined version of it has the advantage of having whatever contact material affixed to the foam, so you can see the object. You can see if anything's missing. You can have two different parts to the same thing and see they're associated. And of course, for that you would not only do the cavity, but you do the lid with a good contact material. So that's the basics. There's lots of details, but that's the basic method.